Today I am going to spend some time with you all talking about self discovery during uncertain times. And I don't think that anyone under the sound of my voice could argue that we are certainly living in uncertain times. I think that in early March, when the coronavirus pandemic became a reality for all of us and we began to shut down our lives and our businesses and schools began to close, the world seemed to start to come and kind of start closing in on us all. And then we had to start making some adjustments and pivot and adjust to a very real new reality. And so, with that, I wanted to present this particular topic. But as the months have proceeded, of course, we are now finding ourselves layering on another issue and taking on some more social things that we didn't necessarily see coming. Not to say that these issues haven't already existed, but right now I think they've been exacerbated because of the current state with coronavirus. So previously, this conversation was specific to coronavirus, but we thought that it would only be appropriate, since we had your attention, to just kind of generalize it and talk more about uncertain times. So one of the biggest things that we're going to talk today about, that I'm very excited about, is self-awareness. And because you all are embarking on an educational journey to improve your craft and to add more tools to your toolbox, self-awareness, especially during this uncertain time of corona and social unrest, self-awareness and just making sure that we are 100% whole as humans before we add any other letters behind our name, and maybe the letter is your business name or whatever else you do. So one of the quotes that I'm inspired by is through one of the great thinkers and self-help gurus, Ian Levon Zant. And she says, everything that happens to you is a reflection of what you believe about yourself. And in terms of self-awareness, I want you all, as I don't know, some people are probably aspiring business owners, some people are probably already business owners or just kind of sharpening their saw. I ask myself every day, and every day since that I started my business, a series of questions. When I first started, the questions were a little bit different because I had a different objective and my target was a little different. And as I matured in business and as I had a better self-awareness of myself, I started to hone in on the questions that would be guiding principles for my business and my personal life. And so the questions are listed on the screen, and I'll kind of walk you through them, even though they may sound or seem self-explanatory. So the first question that I ask myself on a regular basis is, who are you? And I know that I mentioned earlier that sometimes I forget my name because I'm just the Flower Guy Bron, and that's how people refer to me. But there's so much more to that. There's a person, a whole human being behind the brand, the Flower Guy Bron. So I have to really stop and ask myself, okay, outside of all of the ballrooms and outside of your professional relationships and the stages that you're fortunate enough to be on, who are you at the core? So I encourage everyone, and as you're becoming more self-aware during this uncertain time, to ask yourself that question, who am I? Secondly, I ask myself, Bron, what is your zone of genius? And as you develop in your craft, more often than not, you start to hone in and start to have your own design voice or your own processes and procedures, the thing that really makes you special and stand out. So for me personally, when I think about what the Flower Guy Bron zone of genius is, my zone of genius is ballroom floral design. I prefer my designs indoors because I can control the majority of the environment. And I really like large scale installations. So that is my zone of genius. And as you start to ask yourself, hey, what do I do special? What is my zone of genius? I want you to also think about your market and the visuals that your market represents, or the visuals that represent your market. And I want you to think, how can I take these images and interpret them in a way that is truly authentically me and that it's not just what everyone else is doing? Next, I ask myself often, and I encourage you to do the same as well. Ask yourself, what is your promise? And that essentially is, what are you committed to? And for me, I am committed to providing the highest level of floral styling and creating a client experience that is second to none in my market and arguably anywhere else. So that is my promise to the people that I serve and to this industry as a whole. So ask yourself that occasionally. And lastly, I often ask myself, Bron, what is the transformation? And what I mean by that is when people, when clients, when couples, when people come to you for services, how do they leave you changed? And it's not always going to be an aesthetic change. It's not always going to be how you made them feel. It may be a combination of all of them, but you really want people to walk away from their experience with you much differently than how they came. So these are some of the self-awareness tools that I use to help me regulate myself personally, especially now, because I think right now in such uncertain times, dealing with the reality of a pandemic as well as social unrest, I think that it's very easy to get lost in social media, to get lost in the news feeds and the reels and people sending you messages. And some of us may live in cities where the unrest is worse than others. I know that I do. And so it's very easy for us to go off and like really get into a rabbit hole of what's happening around us. And it's so super easy to lose track and sense of yourself. So that's self awareness. So the next topic that I'd like to cover is time. And Oprah Winfrey, another one of my favorite thinkers and influencers, Oprah Winfrey says, I believe that one of the most valuable gifts you can give yourself is time. Every time I listen to one of her podcasts, that's the moniker that comes across before the podcast starts. And I think about it differently every time because I don't think until I had so much time on my hands as a result of COVID and mandatory quarantining and stay at home orders, I really was not conscious of time. I knew where I had to be and I knew what I had to do. But because I had to be so many places and had to do so many things all the time, and I know I'm not the only person that is feeling like that or has felt like that, I lost track of the value of time. And I was not using my time wisely to do a few things. One of the things that I was not doing was taking time to be more present, taking the time to be more present mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, anything that becomes a driving factor in your life or a driving force in your life is so important that we give ourselves time to get back in touch with ourselves. It's so easy again to drift off down a random pathway or to go into a rabbit hole. But I really want to really force the importance of being in touch with yourself. And this is still also even connected to awareness and being self-aware. Also, under time to be present, I want you to think about how you can feed positivity into your being. I know that most of you have probably heard, and if you haven't, you've heard the saying, you are what you eat. And that could not be further from the truth. One of the things that I've learned is that as I started to talk to myself much differently than I had previously, when I started to talk to myself in terms of Bron, you are great. Bron, you're smart. Bron, your work is beautiful. Bron, you're a hard worker. Bron, you're steadfast. And once you commit to something, you fulfill your obligation or your responsibility. Once I started talking to myself differently, the world around me started to reveal itself differently. Some of you may have experienced times in your business development, in your educational pursuits, or in another journey, a moment in time where you didn't feel whole and you didn't feel satisfied and you didn't feel like you were going down the right path and you started to beat yourself up. You started to tear yourself down and you didn't feel adequate and you didn't feel good enough. And you started to look at social media feeds and say, oh my gosh, I really wish I could book that Mindy Weiss wedding, or I wish I could book or have the skill set to, do a Preston Bailey or a Jeff Leatham or whoever the people are that you admire. And you really start to tear yourself down. And I really want to encourage everyone that feeding yourself positivity, no matter where you are in a mental space, it will definitely improve where you are. So be mindful, you are what you eat and you are what you think about yourself. So I need us to all take some special effort, some intentional time to start talking to ourselves as business owners and students and whatever role you play in our industry. Positivity is super important. And then lastly, acknowledging your greatness. I think that as a society, anytime someone says something positive about themselves, they are probably labeled as arrogant or self-centered, and that could not be further from the truth. One thing I'll say is that we have all day long to complain and to talk negatively. And really, when you look out on social media, you'll see so much reflection of negativity these days, especially now. And I really want you to have a positive outlook about yourself and don't be afraid to talk about yourself positively to yourself and also with others. And I think that people seeing that positivity in terms of how your business could potentially develop, when they see confidence, they know that you're capable of doing the job. And that will impact your posture and your body language and how you carry yourself, how you speak and present. And so I really want everyone to, again, look back at time and how quickly these quarantine months have gone by and make sure that you're giving yourself time to be more present. Secondly, in regards to time, I want you to think about your awareness. We talked about self awareness. Now I want you to give yourself time, specific time, to be more aware. I want you to be aware about your impact and effect on others. I think that as a society and as an events community, I think that it's very often, again, I use the word rabbit hole because I know that we all go down them, but it's super easy to go into a rabbit hole of our services and what we provide and our impact and our good deed that we often think, or don't think rather, about how that impacts others. So I want us to be responsible event professionals, and I want us to act on the first good thing all the time, as opposed to misstepping and having to go back and correct a narrative that we could have much easily handled well the first go around. So give yourself time to think about how you and your business impact other people. Also, I want you to think about the perception of the brand or the brand that you aim to create. I want you to think about what people think. It's one thing for us to only think about, well, this is my reality and this is what I want people to see. The real reality of this is that there is perception versus reality, and often, the perception is one thing and the reality is a very different thing. So I want you to look at your logos and your branding over this time. I want you to maybe even talk to some event pros in your market. Maybe you do an analysis. Maybe you hire a company to do an audit so that you can have a very firm handle on the perception of the brand that you're developing. And then lastly, in terms of time to be aware, I want you to be aware of your why. Why is it that you do what you do? So some of you may still be developing that thought. Some of you may have perhaps started into this business because you got married and maybe that wasn't the best outcome and you want to have the opportunity to provide high caliber services to the events industry. Some people have other motivating factors as to why they've landed on this as a job. So I really want you to know why, and I'll give you a sneak peek into my why. For years, my why, well, not for years, I watched as the events industry was dominated by a majority presence and that there were not many faces that looked like mine, even though you can't see it, but many brown faces that were represented at a high caliber or were taken very seriously in our industry, with the exception of a few, of course, Preston Bailey. And so I said to myself, you know what, Bron, you design flowers for your friends and you make flowers for your house. Why not take a stab at it? And so my why was to be a voice and a sounding board and a pioneer in this industry in terms of beautiful floral and events that we have been privileged enough to participate. So my why is I want to be a face that a lot of people don't get a chance to see and move the needle forward in terms of what our industry looks like and what that landscape looks like and feels for people of color. So that was my why. So I want you to establish your why and why is it that I want to be a planner? What is it about photography? What is it about floral and event design? So establishing your why. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about authenticity. Authenticity is a buzzword that has been surrounding our industry and probably every industry in the world for the last couple of years. I think that the model of a corporate structure and the model of different industries looked very differently in the past than they do now. I think right now, everyone is acknowledging that if you force people into a box, or if you force them to do tasks a certain way, and you don't give them the opportunity and the freedom to create, and the freedom to think, and the freedom to be their best selves, they will never perform at maximum potential for you. So as authenticity has kind of infiltrated our industry, there are a few things that I'd like to touch on for you all that will help you establish a more trademarked and authentic business. So one of the things that you can do to remain authentic or to become more authentic is to seek fresh sources for inspiration. One of the things that I like to do is I like to look at different industries. For example, I like to look at architecture magazines and blogs because architecture and the way masons stack stones and limestone facades and bridges and buildings and the movement that we're seeing through architecture is very inspiring to me. I also like to keep my finger on the pulse of the fashion world. Of course, the Pantone color of the year impacts floral colors and linen colors, but it also impacts fashion. And so I want you to start looking at other types of mediums. I want you to consider, all right, maybe Instagram and Facebook should not be the only places that I'm looking, and Pinterest rather, to look to find inspiration. That is duplication. And don't get me wrong, I am not a proponent of people being trying to be the first to do everything. Oh, well, I was the first to do that. There really are no first. It's just people who do it and people who now have figured out ways to maybe even do it a little better. So I don't want you to necessarily not be inspired from Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, but I want you to take those designs and I want you to take them to the next level. Take the inspiration to the next level if you're a stationary person. Find the next new material to create your stationery from. If you're a DJ, figure out how you can merge classical and rock and rap and hip hop and all these different types of things so that you can be a leader. And I think looking at different sources of inspiration will definitely help you get to that place. Also, exploring and creating with new mediums. So primarily my medium is flowers. And sometimes, we have clients who are not so interested in flowers, and I become a candle expert or whatever it is that we're doing for them decor wise. So I want you to look outside of your normal medium. If you're a baker, okay, well, we know that you can sculpt things. Maybe you want to move into clay, or maybe you want to move into painting or illustrating. So think about other creative mediums and outlets that you can tap into that maybe you've never explored before that will help you keep that authentic voice and help keep your creative being fed. Then I also want you to look at what's going on around you in your market and consider customizing your services. So I know if you're a planner, for example, or if you are a photographer, for example, or maybe even a florist, there we have our services, we have our packages, we have the things that we're offering. And then I want you to look at those things and say, what could I do to make myself stand out. For example, when you walk into your local grocery store, you walk down the bread aisle and you'll see maybe 15 or 20 different companies all selling the same exact thing. Now, of course, all the bread isn't baked the same. You got flat breads and you got, your loaf of bread, and loaves of bread comes in, I can't even think about how many different styles. But I want you to think about what makes your service special. I want you to customize it so that when people are walking down that bread aisle, whether that bread aisle is the knot or wedding wire or whatever marketing avenue, I want you to stand out. So think about customizing your services and maybe even offering some a la carte services that you've noticed that other people might not be offering that will make your service all the more custom. For me, we don't rent our vases. One of our custom services is that we sell all of our vases. Therefore, at the end of the night, we have boxes and we're able to pack up the centerpieces, vases included, which makes that handoff much easier. And clients feel as though they have a higher level of service. So think about how you can customize your services. And then lastly, reimagining your environment. I don't know if all of you are working from home or if you're working in a studio space or even if you're meeting at a collaborative workspace or they have those places where you can go and set up office and meet other people. And I think that all of those are great. But I want you to think about reimagining your space, and that will really help you find new sources of inspiration, will help you stay more authentic because you'll have less distraction. One of the best things that I've done over this time off in terms of reimagining my environment was to clean it. Oh my gosh. We hadn't been in the studio for clearly months. And I walked in and I'm like, well, how do the floors get dirty and no one's been in here? And I'm looking at my window sills and there's so many nets and ants dead and dried on the window sill. So the best way for me to reimagine my environment was to go and clean it up and move some things around and to really make sure that when I'm working and designing, I'm able to tap into that authentic flower guy Bron. All right. So this is a little add-on that we had not initially thought that would need to be addressed until the most recent occurrences in our nation. And I think that as event pros, we definitely see the trickle down effect of the race relations and the civil unrest that we're experiencing in our country. So I think that this is a great opportunity, especially while class is in session, to talk about the importance of diversity. And so diversity is one of those topics that has been definitely avoided throughout our industry quite a bit. It has certainly been the elephant in the room, and it has been something that I have been championing for quite some time. I've been met with great applaud when I speak up on some topics, and then I've also been, met with doors closed in my face. And I've come to the reality that this conversation is apparently not for everyone. But I think as event pros and as you're educating yourself and growing in your businesses and developing yourselves as professionals, I think that it's super important that diversity is a conversation that you're not only willing to have, but also a conversation that you're willing to get behind and to start kind of getting on a movement towards a different direction in our world and our industry. So diversity is super important to me because diversity in our industry is important. Excuse me, let me say that again. Diversity in our industry is super important because our industry represents a cross section of the world, a cross section of our country, a cross section of our local markets. And I don't think any of us live in a market that is so isolated where there is no diversity. And it's super important. And it goes back to that quote that Oprah mentioned that I referenced earlier, the importance of people feeling seen. And so, what better to do than to focus and be intentional about diversity? And so, acknowledging the disparity to me is the first step in diversity. I know that I speak to countless professionals on diversity related topics in the events community, and you would be surprised that not everyone knows that this issue exists. As hard as that might be to believe, it is a reality. It's a reality that people don't see the misrepresentation or underrepresentation of people of color and other minorities in our industry. So I want all of us who, since we're in school and we're learning and we're developing, and like I say, your soil has been tilled and you're ready for the seeding, I just want everyone to step back and think about the importance of diversity and what that looks like for you and your business. In terms of the Black wedding and event community, what I have seen is that technically, in most cases, Black wedding professionals are not typically in leadership positions. We're not typically in art director positions. However, you will have to find service positions that are filled with Black people. So I want us to really shift the thought and I want us to really think about what diversity looks like and not just for Black wedding and events community. I think that right now that's the hot button issue, but diversity, I want to be very clear. Diversity is not just about Black and white. Diversity looks like exactly what we know diversity to look like. But I do think that because I am a Black wedding and event professional, that it's my responsibility to speak on that topic specifically. So I really want you to think about what you see at weddings and events and where you see different people playing different roles. And that will give you more insight. I also want you to be involved in some conversations, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But again, just going back to the stress stress topic of intentional diversity in your businesses and as a practice for you all as you're developing in this industry. Next, I want to talk about becoming a better the Flower Guy Bron. And so you can insert whatever your business name is. If you don't have one, whatever you're thinking it might be, insert that business name because we all want to become better. And ways that we can become better are providing increased value. Everybody is always looking for what is the current value proposition? What does that mean? So what's your worth? Are you worth your price? What does your service come with? What's included? That's your value proposition. When I'm looking at a list of proposals, when I go past your proposal, hmm, this proposal stands out because there's more value there. Also want you to look at the value that you can add to your business that's not just product and service related. I think that we think that, okay, well, I'm a florist. My only service and product are flowers and labor. And I don't think about how I can add more value outside of that. During this time, especially before the civil unrest after the death of George Floyd, my value addition was constant communication with my clients. I wanted to make sure that at every step of the way, as the situation with COVID-19 was developing, that they knew exactly what the Flower Guy Bron was doing and how it was impacting them. And that was what I could do to add value during that time to make sure that at no point my clients were wondering what's going on. So think about ways that you can add value to your business, to your client experience, or anything that you're offering that's not just product and service related. Also, we can identify, going the extra mile without jeopardizing your brand. So, for example, one of the things that we have done over the years is realize that not everyone is going to be in our luxury price point. And I really don't care for the word luxury, but for the sake of this presentation, I'll use it. So we developed to answer the needs of brides and couples that were not able to purchase our full services. We developed a series of flower collections that were more economically driven. So we came up with collections that were based on industry trends, based on weddings that are about 100 guests or fewer, and we wanted to provide some package pricing in and out with no problem. So for me, I said, you know what? Let's name this Pastel Posies by the Flower Guy Bron. So that became our subsidiary. And that to me is going the extra mile without jeopardizing the Flower Guy Bron. Now I'm able to offer product and services in different price points without jeopardizing the luxury brand that I've worked very hard to develop. So go the extra mile and figure out how you can do something extra without devaluing yourself or without jeopardizing your time and effort. All right. Now, secondly, in becoming a better insert your business name, let's talk about client experience. Another thing that is bubbling throughout our industry and all sales related industries. Client experience to me has been probably my biggest weapon, my best weapon, and my best kept secret. Client experience is where I believe I stand out the most. I feel like once I get a client into my workspace and they can see and feel my passion, I'm able to connect with them. I've already caught buzzwords that they've thrown out through the consultation. I'm ready to regurgitate those back to them so that they can know I'm listening. Client experience is key. People are not buying services and goods, they're buying and investing in a relationship with you. So again, going back to some of the things that I was doing to add value, we see this again, increasing communication touch points. So for me, and what this looks like is how often, without being a nuisance, can you reach out to your clients? Perhaps it's a newsletter. Perhaps it's information about trends and weddings and events that would be of interest to a couple that is getting married down the road. How can you be in communication with your clients if there's offers or discount codes or shows, they have promo codes? Is a baker doing a tasting? All of this type of information is valuable to your couples, and I want you to think about how we can increase communication. It's not in your best interest to book a client and then they don't hear from you until a month before the wedding when the final payment is due and they have not heard from you. Perhaps there are things that they'd like to have changed. So I want you to be proactive and initiate these communication touch points so that they can feel like their experience was a magic carpet ride. Next, I want you to promote positivity. I want us to think about our client experience and how people are responding to you. And I want you to always remember that positivity will always win. It never goes out of style. So when people ask you questions about your business, when people ask you questions about the state of our industry, I always want you to remember that positivity will always win. And then thirdly, positive transparency. So we talked about positivity and how important that is, but that doesn't mean that everything is always unicorns and gumdrops. That means that throughout COVID-19, personally and professionally, I have had some extreme highs and I've had some extreme lows. And I think all of us in the industry have experienced just that. So it's okay to share your experience. But one of the things that I've been very careful about is to make sure that I always spin what could be very negative into a positive. For example, when we closed our doors at the Flower Guy Bron studio, I only thought that we would be closed for a week or two. At no point did I think that I would be losing all of my spring weddings and the majority of my summer weddings. Never crossed my mind. And with, rescheduling weddings and some weddings canceling, you can only imagine the negative financial impact and emotional impact that it's had on my team and I. But what I'm stressing when people ask me, Bron, how are you? I'm telling them, you know what? I've worked so hard to accumulate things and to experience different things of which I was not experiencing at all. Now I have time, going back to that time to be more present and time to be more aware. Now I have time to walk in my grass, something that I have not done in years. Now I have time to have 3 meals a day with my family. Now I have time to wash the car and wash the dogs and go for a ride through the country with my husband. There's so much time. And so I'm transparent about the struggle sometimes, but well, always transparent, but I'm also going to partner that transparency with a positive spin. So be mindful of your positivity and that you're promoting it, but that's not telling you not to be human and to feel. All right. Now we have some action items. So, in terms of self awareness, I want you to really look back and think about introspection. One of the things that I used to do as an educator was to reflect into introspect. The introspection is about you, and then the reflection is like just kind of looking back on your day, looking back on your career, looking back on your coursework, and to have a solid hold on who you are. I also want you to consider meditation. I have a hard time silencing the noise in my head. It seems like it's always a rock band going on because we're creative. So I want you to think about meditating and trying to silence the confusion, silence the distractions, and have some quiet, peaceful time with yourself. Time again, I want you to be intentional about carving out time for self discovery. And I have found that early mornings are some of the best times to do that. So if you even have to go onto your calendar and say, okay, for the first 15 or 20 minutes of the day, I'm going to give myself time to think, time to reflect, time to meditate. And I want you to block that time out and have it as a reoccurring time on your calendar to dedicate to yourself. Also, I want you to work on that authenticity piece. Perhaps you host a virtual vision board party or consider a daily affirmation. The vision board party, you can get your friends together, other industry pros, and you can start charting out what 2021 and 2022 look like. What do you want your business to look like? What do you want your clients to feel when they think about your business? And then these daily affirmations, take the time out again. Time keeps coming back because it's so important. Take some time out to speak positively to yourself and affirm your greatness, even in times where you don't feel so great and you don't feel like you've done the best that you could do. And I think that we beat ourselves up. So I want us to be more less self-hating and more self-loving and truly start to talk to ourselves different. Remember, you are what you eat. And lastly, almost lastly, I want you to think about becoming, becoming a better whoever you are. You know, I don't. And I want you to seek opportunities to add value to what it is that you're offering to our industry because you are valuable, your service is valuable, and there are tons of customers that are waiting for you to bring your service and product to the market. All right. So we talked a little bit about diversity and how important it is that our industry represents all people and that is everyone can see themselves represented there. I have done some really great work in the last few days as it relates to the civil unrest. I know I've said that 1,000 times in race relations. And so, what I've come up with is a unique hashtag that is meant to be an ongoing action item, not just for you, but for me and for everyone in the industry. And that hashtag is unity through community. If you search it on Instagram, you'll see hundreds, if not by this point, thousands of posts of industry professionals promoting unity through community. And I thought to myself, well, we have Black Lives Matter. There's so many hashtags that go on. But what do we need in our industry right now? And I really felt like we needed some unity. I felt like we have become kind of disjointed and separated and segregated. And you see vendor teams that aren't diverse, and you see a lot of things going on. And so my thought is unity through community could be a moniker that we can all shout across the industry on an ongoing basis. Once the dust is settled, once panels are dying down, once the news media is covering something else, and when we're sitting alone and we're like, wow, how did that pass? Like, how did we get past that? Well, we really haven't. So I want us to really consider using this hashtag unity through community and on an ongoing basis. Again, this is not something that is supposed to last for 7 days while we're promoting some good things. This is a hashtag that I feel like should be a constant reminder of the work that we need to do, and also a model and a goal for us to be aspiring to in our industry. Also, I want you all to continue to seek education. I love speaking to education focused groups. And in that education, I think that it's important that we're seeking bias training. We all have biases, and there's nothing that we can really do about it. We're not born with them, but as a result of our upbringing and life experiences, we develop biases about other communities. So I want you to educate yourself and really understand how to conduct business without bias. And then, thirdly, crucial conversations. Crucial conversations are difficult conversations. These conversations are often conversations with your web pros in your market. They're conversations with your peers in class. They might be conversations with your instructors. No matter who the conversations are, you have to be open and willing to have a conversation that might not be so comfortable. So those are those crucial conversations. Be on the front lines, believe what you believe, and speak to those things, and don't be scared of the backlash. Everyone who has stood on the right side of history has certainly had some backlash. And then lastly, challenging the status quo. The status quo is exactly what we have seen and what we know it to be. And so I want to take a challenge through unity, through community, to challenge that status quo to move the needle forward in our events community. So, if you're interested in how you can stay connected with the Flower Guy Bron, I'd like for you to head over to Facebook groups and search The Village. The Village is a motivational community for wedding and event professionals, and the link is right at the bottom. So if you type that in, The Village One in Facebook groups, you will find our motivational and inspirational community. The thought behind the village is that the village serves to represent, again, a diverse cross section of our industry. I want everyone to know that I don't know everything, and neither do you. But through joining this community, we can learn and grow together about each other's services and about each other's experience. So I'd love to have you as part of my village. And lastly, you can find us on all social media platforms, and particularly Instagram and Facebook. Right now, we are on a Unity Through Community Challenge. If you check out our Instagram page, you'll see beautiful representation of diverse event pros in our industry. And I'd love for you to follow us and join us in our movement. And that concludes our presentation today. So I hope that everyone was able to take at least one tidbit from this conversation and add it as a tool to their toolbox as we all navigate life in the wedding and events industry and the hospitality industry. So thank you so much again for your time, and Godspeed.